So, Generation Z. Are they really as complicated as everyone seems to think? Or maybe are we just looking at the world through a completely new lens here? Today, we're doing a deep dive into Gen Z. That's anyone born roughly between, 1996 and 2012. Our mission is to really pull out the key nuggets from the sources you sent over to help you understand what makes this generation tick.
Yeah, and understanding them isn't just, slapping on a label. It's more about getting a handle on the forces that are shaping, well, everything. Our future, how we talk to each other, how business works,
Yeah.
even how we think about success or mental well-being. It's fascinating how their upbringing really frames their entire approach.
Okay, so building on that, what's the absolute bedrock, the sort of foundational thing that shapes everything else for them?
Well, looking at the research you shared, the big one is that they are the first generation, truly, to grow up completely inside the digital age.
Yeah.
It's not just about owning a smartphone. It's like being shaped by constant connectivity, basically, from birth.
Right. And how does that actually play out? Is it just like more hours staring at screens, or is their way of using tech fundamentally different?
Oh, it's much deeper than just screen time. It affects how they communicate, think very visual like TikTok, Instagram,
Hmm.
but also how they learn, how they build relationships. Their whole view of the world, really. They're masters of multitasking, hopping between apps, platforms, super seamless. And they definitely prefer content that's short, quick, easy to digest.
Yeah.
It's just native to them.
That's really interesting how that digital first world shapes, well, everything. So, how does that connect to their core values, beyond the usual stereotypes we hear?
Forget the lazy or coddled stuff for a minute. The sources actually paint a picture of a generation that's incredible entrepreneurial, self-starters. It's not just ambition in the old sense. It's more like adaptability.
Yeah.
They pivot fast because the world changes fast. They often make their own way instead of waiting for a path. And they really, really value authenticity and transparency. They expect it from brands, bosses, even their friends.
And that authenticity piece seems tied to diversity too, right? The research kept pointing out that for many of them, diversity isn't some abstract idea, it's just their lived experience. How does that change things?
Exactly. Growing up with multicultural backgrounds or in diverse communities, it's just baked in. So the expectation for inclusivity, for seeing representation everywhere, it's much higher.
Yeah.
And connecting that back, their pragmatism is also really noticeable. They saw the financial crisis, global instability, stuff like that during really formative years.
Yeah.
That definitely shapes how they view the future.
Okay, so you have this constant awareness of a world that feels kind of unstable, plus the nonstop digital connection. I imagine that can take a toll. What does the research suggest about their mental health?
Yeah, it's true. The sources do show higher reported levels of anxiety, depression, partly linked to that constant onness, maybe,
Yeah.
and navigating a pretty uncertain world. But what's really striking is how open they are about it. They talk about mental health, and they're pretty proactive about setting boundaries, too,
Boundaries.
like around screen time or finding a real work-life balance. Even in the personal relationships, there's a kind of self-awareness there, a willingness to prioritize their well-being that feels different, distinct.
And it feels like that proactive stance might fuel another key trait, their social consciousness, their activism. How are they engaging with issues?
Oh, absolutely. They're deeply passionate about social justice, climate change, equity, you name it. They're likely to volunteer, sure, but also to really push causes online, hold institutions accountable. It's this mix, this blend of digital and real-world action, hashtags leading to actual hands-on involvement.
That pragmatism you mentioned earlier, does it show up in their finances too? How do they think about money compared to, say, millennials?
Precisely. Yeah, seeing families struggle through tough economic times has made them pretty cautious, financially speaking,
Hmm.
but also ambitious. They really value saving, investing, planning ahead. And you see so many of them with side hustles or starting their own thing much earlier than previous generations might have. So what seems complicated or maybe confusing to older folks is really just their reality. And they're navigating it with a lot of resilience, creativity, and that constant demand for authenticity.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway for you listening to this?
I think it's that Gen Z isn't really complicated.
Yeah.
They're just adapting incredibly quickly to a world that's changing at warp speed, using tools and perspectives older generations simply didn't have. Their complexity, if you want to call it that, comes from juggling things. No generation before had to juggle like this level of digital access. Global crises hitting close to home, shifting social rules, all at once. They're a product of the world they inherited, not some sort of puzzle to be solved.
So, thinking about everything we discussed about Generation Z, maybe the question for you is how might Their way of using technology, their values, their whole approach, how might that inspire or maybe even challenge you to adapt in your own life?